The shrill scream of sirens pierced the morning air like broken glass, shattering the peaceful rhythm of downtown Millbrook's rush hour. Bus brakes shrieked against asphalt as three city transit vehicles lurched to simultaneous stops, their hydraulic doors gasping open to release floods of panicked passengers onto the sidewalk. "Everyone out! Move! Move! Move!" Officer Martinez's voice cracked with urgency as he waved his arms, directing the growing crowd away from the intersection of Maple and 3rd. Behind him, more patrol cars arrived in a symphony of wailing sirens, their red and blue lights painting the gray morning in urgent colors. Amara Osman clutched her worn leather work bag closer to her chest, her dark eyes wide with confusion as she was swept along with the crowd. The 52-year-old woman had been on her way to the Riverside Community Center, where she worked as a custodian, the same route she had taken every morning for 3 years, since arriving in Millbrook as a refugee from Somalia. "What's happening?" she asked in accented English to the young man beside her, but he was already jogging away, his phone pressed to his ear. The acrid smell of exhaust mingled with the morning coffee from the nearby cafe, now abandoned as its customers joined the growing evacuation. 2 blocks away, Detective Sarah Chen stepped out of her unmarked sedan, her radio crackling with updates. "This is Chen. I'm on scene. What do we have?" "Bomb threat called in at 7:43 a.m., came the dispatcher's voice. "Caller reported suspicious individual with explosive device on bus route 15. Requesting full hazmat and bomb squad response." Sarah's stomach tightened. She had been with the Millbrook Police Department for 12 years, and nothing made her more uneasy than bomb threats. They were usually false alarms, but the protocol was always the same: treat every threat as real until proven otherwise. Meanwhile, 3 miles across town in the affluent Maplewood neighborhood, Karen Hendricks stood at her kitchen window, watching the flashing lights in the distance with a satisfied smile tugging at her thin lips. Her manicured fingers drummed against the granite countertop as she sipped her organic fair trade coffee from a mug that read, "World's Best Neighbor." The irony was not lost on those who truly knew her. Karen had moved to Millbrook 15 years ago when her hedge fund manager husband bought their colonial-style house for what she called a steal. At 58, she maintained her blonde highlights with religious devotion and her sense of neighborhood superiority with even greater fervor. As president of the Maplewood Homeowners Association, she had made it her personal mission to preserve what she called community standards. Back at the evacuation zone, the bomb squad arrived in their heavy tactical vehicle, its presence sending a fresh wave of anxiety through the crowd. Specialist Rodriguez emerged in his protective suit, moving with practiced efficiency toward the buses that now sat empty like abandoned metal shells. "Ma'am, we need you to move back further," Officer Martinez called to Amara, who had been standing uncertainly near the police tape. She nodded quickly, her headscarf shifting slightly in the morning breeze. "I was just going to work," she said quietly, more to herself than to anyone else. Her English, though accented, was clear and precise. She had studied the language for years, first in the refugee camp in Kenya, then during her long journey to America, and finally in the evening classes she attended at the community college. Detective Chen approached the bus driver of Route 15, a veteran named Frank Morrison, who had been driving city routes for 28 years. His hands shook slightly as he lit his 3rd cigarette since the evacuation began. "Tell me about the call," Chen said, pulling out her notepad. "Who reported the threat?" Frank took a deep drag before responding. "Wasn't someone on the bus. Dispatcher said it came from a concerned citizen who saw something suspicious. Described a woman carrying what looked like explosives in a bag." Description of the suspect: African woman, middle-aged, wearing a head covering, said she was acting nervous and suspicious. Frank's weathered face creased with concern. Detective, I've been driving this route for years. I know my regular passengers. There was nothing suspicious about anyone on that bus this morning. Chen made notes, her pen moving quickly across the paper. Something about this felt wrong. False bomb threats were usually called in by disgruntled individuals trying to disrupt their own workplace or school. External reports from concerned citizens were less common and often more complicated. Across the cordon, local news reporter Jessica Williams had arrived with her cameraman. The 28-year-old journalist smelled a story, especially when she noticed the specific demographic details in the police reports she had overheard on her scanner. This is Jessica Williams reporting live from downtown Millbrook, where a bomb threat has shut down 3 city blocks. She spoke into her microphone, her voice carrying the gravity of breaking news. Police are treating this as an active threat after receiving a call about a suspicious individual allegedly carrying explosive materials on public transportation. The crowd behind her had grown to nearly 200 people, a mix of commuters, shop owners, and curious onlookers. Among them, Amara stood quietly, still holding her work bag, unaware that she was the subject of the massive law enforcement response surrounding her. Dr. Michael Rahman, a cardiologist at Millbrook General Hospital, had been on his way to surgery when the buses stopped. As he watched the scene unfold, a cold realization began to form in his stomach. He had seen this before, in different cities, with different faces, but the pattern was always the same. "This is racial profiling," he said to his colleague, Dr. Patricia Wells, who had also been caught in the evacuation. "Mark my words, they're looking for someone who fits a very specific profile." Dr. Wells, a white woman in her 60s, who had worked in emergency medicine for decades, nodded grimly. "I've seen too many of these false alarms. They always seem to target the same communities." Back at the bomb squad's command post, Specialist Rodriguez's voice crackled through the radio. "Initial sweep of Bus 15 complete. No explosive devices detected. Moving to secondary search of passenger belongings." Detective Chen felt a familiar knot in her stomach. In her experience, when bomb threats were this specific about targeting individuals from particular ethnic backgrounds, they were usually motivated by prejudice rather than legitimate security concerns. She decided to trace the original call. At the dispatch center, Supervisor Linda Martinez pulled up the recording of the 911 call. The caller's voice was sharp, educated, with a slight nasal quality that suggested middle-class suburban origins. 911, what's your emergency? Yes, I need to report a bomb threat. There's a Somalian woman on the bus with explosives. She's acting very suspicious, and I can see wires coming out of her bag. This is bus route 15 heading downtown. You need to stop it immediately before she hurts innocent people. Ma'am, can you provide your name and location? I can't give my name, but I'm a concerned citizen. I know what I saw. She's one of those refugees, and she's definitely up to something. Please hurry. The line went dead. Detective Chen listened to the recording 3 times, each playback making her more certain that this was a false report. The caller's description was too generic, too focused on ethnic and religious identifiers rather than specific threatening behavior. "Run a trace on that number," she instructed the dispatcher. Meanwhile, the evacuation zone had expanded to include a 4-block radius. Local businesses were forced to close, costing the area thousands of dollars in lost revenue. The elementary school 3 blocks away had gone into lockdown, leaving parents panicking as they tried to reach their children. Amara found herself being questioned by Officer Martinez for the third time. Her patience, already strained by the confusion and fear surrounding her, began to show cracks. "Ma'am, I need you to open your bag for inspection," the officer said, his tone professional but firm. "I already showed you," Amara replied, her voice carrying a note of frustration. "It's cleaning supplies for my work. Spray bottles, paper towels, rubber gloves. I clean the community center." "I understand, but we need to be thorough. Can you remove each item slowly?" As Amara began to unpack her bag again, a crowd of onlookers gathered. Some watched with genuine concern, others with barely concealed suspicion. The whispers started small, but grew louder. "Is that her? The one with the bomb? Why isn't she in handcuffs?" "Dr. Rahman pushed through the crowd, his medical badge visible on his coat. "Officer, what evidence do you have that this woman poses any threat?" Officer Martinez looked up, clearly uncomfortable with the growing attention. "Sir, I need you to step back. We're following protocol based on a credible threat." Credible, based on what? Her appearance, her religion, her country of origin. Dr. Rahman's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being heard in crisis situations. The tension in the crowd was becoming palpable. Jessica Williams, sensing the shift in the story, directed her cameraman to focus on the confrontation developing around Amara. Detective Chen's radio crackled with an update. "Chen, we've got the trace on that 911 call. Number belongs to a Karen Hendricks. 1247 Elm Street in Maplewood. Running background now." Sarah's eyebrows rose. Maplewood was one of Millbrook's most expensive neighborhoods. Hardly the location where someone would witness suspicious activity on a city bus route that didn't even service that area. "Send a unit to that address," she ordered. "I want to talk to Ms. Hendricks immediately." At her Maplewood home, Karen was beginning to feel the first stirrings of nervousness. The news coverage was more extensive than she had anticipated, and the evacuation zone was larger than she had intended. She had simply wanted to cause enough disruption to make her point about the changing demographics of her neighborhood. The truth was more petty and vindictive than anyone could have imagined. Amara Osman had recently put in an application to rent a small apartment just 2 blocks from Karen's house. The landlord, Hassan al-Rashid, was a successful businessman who owned several properties in the area. When Hassan mentioned his new tenant to Karen during a chance encounter at the grocery store, her reaction had been immediate and visceral. "Another one of them," she had said, not bothering to hide her disdain. "Hassan, you're destroying the character of this neighborhood. First your family, now you're bringing in more refugees. Don't you care about property values?" Hassan, a Lebanese American who had lived in Millbrook for 15 years and whose children attended the same private school as Karen's grandchildren, had been stunned by her brazen bigotry. "Karen, these are good people who have been through terrible hardships. They're trying to rebuild their lives and contribute to our community. They're changing everything." Karen had snapped. "The way the neighborhood looks, the way it feels. It's not the same place I moved to." That conversation had been 3 weeks ago. Since then, Karen had watched Amara's daily routine with growing resentment. She learned the woman's work schedule, her bus route, her habits. The false bomb threat had been Karen's attempt to create enough chaos and negative association to pressure Hassan into reconsidering the lease. She had not anticipated the scale of the response or the potential consequences of her actions. Back at the evacuation zone, the situation was escalating rapidly. Specialist Rodriguez had completed his thorough examination of Amara's belongings and found nothing more dangerous than glass cleaner and disinfectant. However, the crowd's mood had shifted from concern to something uglier. "Why is she still free?" shouted someone from the back of the crowd. "If she called in a bomb threat, arrest her." "She didn't call in any threat," Dr. Rahman called back. "She's a victim of someone else's false report." But his words were drowned out by other voices, some demanding action, others defending Amara. The divide was becoming clear and troubling, splitting along racial and cultural lines that reflected deeper tensions within the community. Officer Martinez was trying to maintain order when his radio squawked with an urgent message. "All units, be advised. We have officers at the residence of the 911 caller. Karen Hendricks is denying making any call. Claims her phone was stolen earlier this morning." Detective Chen, who was monitoring all radio traffic, immediately responded. "That's obviously false. Run phone records for the past week. I want to know every call made from that number." Meanwhile, Karen was becoming increasingly agitated as she spoke with Officers Johnson and Rodriguez at her front door. Her story about a stolen phone was falling apart under even basic questioning. "Ma'am, your phone is right there on your kitchen counter," Officer Johnson pointed out, visible through the open doorway. "And you just answered it when we called to verify your number." Karen's face flushed red. "Well, I found it again. It was under some papers." "Mrs. Hendricks, we're going to need you to come with us for questioning. Making false reports to 911 is a serious crime." The word crime hit Karen like a physical blow. In all her calculations about causing disruption for Amara and Hassan, she had somehow never considered that her actions might have legal consequences for herself. "Now wait just a minute," she said, her voice taking on the imperious tone she used at homeowners association meetings. "I'm a respected member of this community. I serve on the hospital board and the library committee. You can't just drag me away like some common criminal." "Ma'am, if you made a false bomb threat, that's exactly what you are," Officer Rodriguez replied evenly. Back downtown, the bomb squad had completed their exhaustive search. Every bag, every bus, every piece of debris within a 4-block radius had been examined. The only explosive materials found were the standard emergency flares carried by city transit vehicles. Specialist Rodriguez approached Detective Chen with his final report. Nothing. No explosives. No suspicious materials. No threat whatsoever. This was a completely false alarm. Sarah nodded grimly. By her calculations, the false report had cost the city over $50,000 in emergency response resources. But the human cost was harder to quantify. Amara sat on a bus stop bench, her work bag beside her, watching as the massive law enforcement response began to wind down. She was supposed to have started work 3 hours ago, but the community center director, Ms. Patricia Holmes, had already called to tell her not to worry about the day's wages. "I'm so sorry this happened to you, Ms. Holmes had said. "Take the day to recover. We'll see you tomorrow if you're feeling up to it." But Amara wasn't sure she would ever feel up to it again. The looks she had received from some members of the crowd, the suspicion and hostility, had reminded her of the worst times in the refugee camp, when desperation brought out the worst in people. "Dr. Rahman approached her with a gentle expression. "Are you all right? Is there anyone I can call for you?" Amara looked up at him with eyes that held years of accumulated pain. "I just wanted to go to work. I have been in America for 3 years. I pay taxes. I follow laws. I try to be good neighbor. Why do they hate us so much?" The question hung in the air without an easy answer. Jessica Williams was conducting interviews with witnesses and bystanders when Detective Chen approached her. "Ms. Williams, I have an update on the investigation you might find interesting." "I'm listening, Detective." "We've arrested the person who made the false bomb threat, Karen Hendricks, 58, of Maplewood. She called in a completely fabricated report that wasted city resources and terrorized an innocent woman." Jessica's eyes widened. This was the twist that would make the story truly significant. What was her motivation? That's still under investigation, but preliminary evidence suggests this was a targeted attack motivated by racial and religious prejudice. The arrest at Karen's house had not gone smoothly. When officers Johnson and Rodriguez attempted to place her in handcuffs, she had begun screaming about her rights, her connections, and her status in the community. "You can't arrest me. I know Mayor Whitman personally. I donate to the Police Benevolent Fund. This is harassment." Her neighbors, drawn by the commotion, watched from their manicured lawns as Karen was loaded into the back of a patrol car. The same woman who had spent years policing their community's appearance and behavior was now being hauled away for a crime that had terrorized an innocent person and wasted tens of thousands of public dollars. Mrs. Eleanor Peterson, Karen's next-door neighbor for 12 years, watched the scene with a mixture of shock and dawning recognition. "I always wondered about some of the things she said at the homeowners' meetings," she murmured to her husband. "The way she talked about maintaining standards and preserving character. I thought she was just being overly particular. But now..." At the police station, Detective Chen conducted the interview with Karen in the presence of a court-appointed attorney. The recording of this session would later become evidence in the hate crime charges that followed. "Mrs. Hendricks, we have phone records showing that the 911 call reporting the bomb threat came from your number at 7:43 this morning. We also have your voice clearly recorded making these false claims. Do you want to explain why you did this?" Karen sat stiffly in her chair, her attorney having advised her to remain silent. But her anger and sense of victimization eventually overcame her caution. "You don't understand what it's like to see your neighborhood changing," she finally said. "These people come here with their different ways, their different clothes, their different smells. They don't understand our culture, our values. So you decided to terrorize an innocent woman and waste emergency resources because you didn't like her ethnicity." "I didn't mean for it to get so big," Karen admitted, her voice smaller now. "I just wanted to make a point, to show people that we need to be more careful about who we let into our community." The attorney winced, knowing that his client had just provided a clear confession of a hate-motivated crime. News of Karen's arrest spread quickly through Millbrook's interconnected community. The story had all the elements that made local news go viral: false accusations, racial prejudice, massive emergency response, and a privileged perpetrator facing consequences. Hassan al-Rashid learned about the incident when his daughter called him from school, having seen news reports on her phone. The betrayal he felt was profound. Karen had been someone he considered a neighbor, if not a friend. He had attended community meetings where she spoke about neighborhood values and civic responsibility. That evening, Hassan drove to the small apartment where Amara was staying temporarily with another Somalian family, the Mohammeds. He found her sitting quietly on the front steps, still wearing her work clothes from the morning that had gone so terribly wrong. "Amara, I came to apologize," he said, sitting beside her on the concrete steps. "I feel responsible for what happened to you today." She looked at him with confusion. "Why, you did nothing wrong." "I told Karen Hendricks that you were going to be my new tenant. I think, I think that's what triggered her to make that false report. Amara absorbed this information slowly. The idea that someone would go to such extreme lengths to prevent her from living in a particular neighborhood was almost beyond her comprehension. She did this because I am Somalian. I believe so, yes. They sat in silence for several minutes, watching the evening traffic pass by on the busy street. Finally, Amara spoke again. In my country, before the war, I was teacher. I taught children mathematics and science. I had good life, good family, good future. Her voice carried the weight of enormous loss. War took everything. My husband, my home, my profession. But I survived because I believed America would be different. Hassan felt the inadequacy of any response he could offer. Today, Amara continued, I wondered if I made mistake coming here. If maybe there is no place where people like me are truly welcome. There are good people here, Hassan said quietly. More good people than bad people. What happened today was wrong. But look at how many people stood up for you. The doctor, the reporter, even some of the police officers. They saw the injustice and spoke out. Amara nodded slowly. Yes, that is true. Some people were kind. Over the following days, the story gained national attention. Jessica Williams' reporting had captured not just the facts of the false bomb threat, but the human dimension of how prejudice and fear could destroy community trust and individual lives. The video of Amara being questioned repeatedly, while clearly innocent, contrasted with footage of Karen's arrest and her privileged protests about her status and connections, became a powerful symbol of injustice and accountability. Civil rights organizations rallied around Amara's case, offering legal support and calling for hate crime charges. The Council on American Islamic Relations issued a statement condemning the attack and calling for broader education about the Muslim community's contributions to American society. But perhaps the most significant response came from Millbrook's residents themselves. 3 days after the incident, over 400 people gathered in Riverside Park for a community unity rally, organized by an interfaith coalition led by Pastor Williams of the Methodist Church, Rabbi Goldman of Temple Beth Israel, and Imam Abdullah of the Islamic Center of Millbrook. Dr. Rahman spoke to the crowd about the importance of standing up to prejudice whenever and wherever it appears. Silence in the face of injustice is complicity. What happened to Amara Osman could have happened to any of us who don't fit someone's narrow definition of who belongs in their America. When Amara herself was invited to speak, the crowd fell completely silent. She stood at the microphone, still somewhat overwhelmed by the attention, but determined to be heard. Thank you for being here, she said, her voice carrying clearly across the park. 3 days ago, I thought maybe I had made mistake coming to America. Today, I see that America is not perfect, but it is a place where wrong things can be made right, where bad people can be held responsible, and where good people will stand up for justice. The applause was thunderous and sustained. I came to America as refugee because I believe in American dream. Not dream of becoming rich or famous, but dream of living in place where all people are treated with dignity, where children can go to school safely, where neighbors help neighbors instead of hurting them. She paused, gathering her thoughts and her courage. What Karen Hendricks did was wrong and hurtful. But what you are doing today, coming together, speaking out against hate, showing that this community is better than its worst members, this gives me hope. This is the America I dreamed of. And this is the America I still believe in. The legal consequences for Karen were swift and comprehensive. She was charged with making false reports to emergency services, a felony carrying up to 5 years in prison. Federal prosecutors added hate crime charges, elevating the potential penalties significantly. The city filed a civil lawsuit to recover the costs of the emergency response, which had ultimately totaled over $68,000 when all overtime, equipment deployment, and lost productivity was calculated. Karen's Homeowners Association, perhaps most devastating to her sense of identity, voted unanimously to remove her from the board and revoke her membership. The very organization she had used to police her neighbors' behavior was now rejecting her own. Hassan, meanwhile, made a public announcement that not only would Amara's lease agreement remain in place, but that he would be waiving her security deposit and first month's rent as a gesture of apology for the trauma she had endured. More significantly, he established the Community Welcome Fund, designed to help refugee families with housing deposits and integration services. The fund received donations from across the country as news of Amara's story spread. 6 months later, Millbrook had changed in subtle but important ways. The community center where Amara worked had established a cultural exchange program, where longtime residents and recent immigrants could meet in structured, positive environments. Dr. Rahman had started a monthly speaker series at the hospital, featuring community members from different backgrounds discussing their experiences and contributions to the city. The police department, somewhat embarrassed by the massive response to an obviously false report, implemented new training protocols for evaluating threat reports and recognizing potential bias-motivated false claims. Karen Hendricks was sentenced to 2 years in prison and ordered to pay full restitution to the city. Her house in Maplewood went into foreclosure during her incarceration, the legal fees and fines having destroyed her financial stability. But perhaps the most meaningful change was in the small, daily interactions between neighbors who might previously have remained strangers. Amara, now settled in her new apartment just 2 blocks from where Karen had once lived, had become something of a neighborhood fixture. Her small garden produced vegetables she shared with neighbors, and her experience as a former teacher led to informal tutoring sessions for local children struggling with math and science. Mrs. Peterson, Karen's former next-door neighbor, had become one of Amara's closest friends. The older woman often reflected on how many opportunities for connection and understanding she had missed over the years, by accepting Karen's divisive worldview without question. "I'm ashamed that it took something this dramatic for me to examine my own assumptions," she told Jessica Williams during a follow-up interview 1 year later. "But I'm grateful that Amara was gracious enough to help me become a better person and a better neighbor." On the first anniversary of what local media had dubbed the false alarm incident, the community held another rally, this time focused on celebration rather than response to crisis. The theme was building bridges, not walls, and the crowd was even larger than the previous year's Unity gathering. Amara, now more comfortable with public speaking, addressed the crowd with confidence and hope. 1 year ago, one person's fear and hatred caused great harm and division. But that one person's actions also revealed the strength and goodness of this community. Today, we are more united, more understanding, and more committed to justice than we were before. She paused, looking out over the diverse crowd of faces, young and old, recent immigrants and longtime residents, people of every race and faith that called Millbrook home. Karen Hendricks wanted to divide us, to make some of us feel unwelcome and unsafe. Instead, she helped us discover how much stronger we are when we stand together. In her attempt to destroy community, she helped us build a better one. Detective Chen, who had been promoted to sergeant partly due to her handling of the false bomb threat case, was in attendance with her family. She had used the incident as a teaching case in police academy training, emphasizing the importance of critical thinking and cultural sensitivity in threat assessment. The Hendricks case taught us that our job isn't just to respond to reports, but to think carefully about why those reports are being made and what biases might be influencing them. She explained to new recruits, "Law enforcement has a responsibility to protect all community members, especially those who might be targeted because of their race, religion, or immigration status." The story of the false bomb threat had ultimately become a story of community resilience and growth. What began as an act of hatred and division had catalyzed conversations, relationships, and institutions that made Millbrook a more inclusive and just place to live. As the anniversary rally concluded, and families began heading home in the golden light of late afternoon, Amara walked slowly through her neighborhood, greeting familiar faces and reflecting on the long journey from that terrifying morning 1 year earlier. The America she had dreamed of as a refugee was not a perfect place. She had learned it was a place where terrible things could happen, where prejudice and fear could temporarily triumph, where innocent people could be hurt by the hatred of others. But it was also a place where wrongs could be righted, where communities could choose justice over division, where one person's hatred could be overwhelmed by many people's love. That evening, as she tended her small garden in the fading light, Amara thought about the letter she had received that morning from a young Somalian woman who was considering immigrating to America. The woman had heard about the bomb threat incident and was frightened about what kind of reception she might receive. Amara had written back immediately, "Come to America. Yes, you will face challenges and sometimes cruelty. But you will also find good people who will stand with you, who will fight for justice, and who will help you build the life you dream of. The America that welcomed me is the same America that will welcome you. It is not perfect, but it is worth the journey." As she sealed the letter, Amara smiled, thinking about how much her own understanding had deepened over the past year. She had learned that belonging was not something that could be granted or taken away by others, but something that came from contributing to the community around you and standing up for the values that made that community strong. The false alarm had ended, but the real story, the story of a community choosing to be better than its worst impulses, was still being written every day, in small acts of kindness and understanding between neighbors who had once been strangers. And in that continuing story, Amara Osman had found not just a place to live, but a home worth defending and a future worth building.